The Little Red Riding Hood. Once upon a time, in a small village on the edge of a vast forest, there lived a sweet little girl called Little Red Riding Hood. She was known for her kindness and for always wearing her favorite red hooded cloak, which her grandmother had made for her. One sunny morning, her mother called her and said, "Little Red Riding Hood, your grandmother isn't feeling well. Please take this basket of food to her cottage deep in the forest. But remember, stay on the path and don't talk to strangers." Excited to help her grandmother, Little Red Riding Hood set off on her journey. The forest was alive with the sounds of chirping birds and rustling leaves. The sunlight peeked through the tall trees, creating a magical, golden glow. As she skipped along the path, she admired the flowers and the gentle breeze that carried the scent of pine. But she didn't notice the sharp eyes watching her from behind a tree. It was a wolf, a cunning, hungry wolf. The wolf stepped onto the path, startling Little Red Riding Hood. Trying to appear friendly, he asked, "Where are you going, little girl?" She hesitated for a moment but then said, "I'm visiting my grandmother, who lives in the cottage at the end of this path." The wolf smiled slyly and said, "What a lovely idea. Perhaps you should pick some flowers for her along the way." Delighted by the suggestion, Little Red Riding Hood wandered off the path to gather a colorful bouquet, not realizing the wolf had dashed ahead toward her grandmother's cottage. The wolf arrived at the cottage and knocked on the door. "Who's there?" called grandmother from inside. Disguising his voice, the wolf replied, "It's me, Little Red Riding Hood." Thinking it was her granddaughter, grandmother opened the door, and in an instant, the wolf leaped inside. He locked grandmother in the closet, put on her nightgown and cap, and climbed into her bed, waiting for Little Red Riding Hood to arrive. A little while later, Little Red Riding Hood reached the cottage with her basket of food and her bouquet of flowers. She knocked on the door and heard a voice that sounded strange but familiar. "Come in, my dear," called the wolf, trying to mimic grandmother's voice. Little Red Riding Hood entered, noticing that her grandmother looked different. She placed the basket on the table and approached the bed. "Oh, grandmother, what big eyes you have," she said. "The better to see you with, my dear," replied the wolf. "And grandmother, what big ears you have," she continued. "The better to hear you with, my dear," he answered. Finally, she said, "Grandmother, what big teeth you have." The wolf grinned, baring his sharp fangs. "The better to eat you with," he roared, and he leaped out of bed toward her. Little Red Riding Hood screamed and darted away, knocking over a chair as she tried to escape. Just as the wolf lunged for her, the door burst open. It was a woodcutter who had been passing by and heard the commotion. With his axe in hand, he chased the wolf around the cottage. The wolf, realizing he was outmatched, fled into the forest, never to be seen again. Little Red Riding Hood and the woodcutter quickly unlocked the closet, freeing grandmother. She hugged her granddaughter tightly, relieved that she was safe. The three of them sat down, enjoying the food Little Red Riding Hood had brought. Grandmother laughed, "That was quite the adventure, wasn't it?" As they ate, Little Red Riding Hood promised to always listen to her mother's advice. "I should have stayed on the path and never talked to strangers," she said. Grandmother nodded with a smile, proud of her granddaughter for learning such an important lesson. From that day on, Little Red Riding Hood was more careful on her journeys. The forest became her favorite place to visit, but she always stayed on the path. Grandmother recovered quickly, and they often laughed about the day a brave little girl and a kind woodcutter outsmarted a cunning wolf. And so, they all lived happily ever after.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share and subscribe to 5 A Minute Storybook for more motivational content.